the country into what it is today. It's also a curse because invariably you get the question, can I take the slaves there? So it's a really fascinating topic. We got to Shays' Rebellion, okay, and we said that Shays' Rebellion is really the impetus for the Constitutional Convention because the rich, the wealthy, the elites realized that there needs to be a stronger government to protect private property, to protect banking interest, to promote business. Nobody is going to invest in a country that is in the midst of economic upheaval. Just take a look at what's going on right now. Take a look at what's going on right now with markets, with investment in this country, with all of this debt ceiling debate and all of this budget debate. You've got countries around the world that are writing op-ed pieces. There was a thing in the I think it was in a Chinese newspaper today that was basically saying, why are we constantly looking to the Americans for our economic success? They can't get their own house in order. Why should we invest in this country? Chaos is not good for economic investment. The country must be secure for investment to occur. Shays' Rebellion opens wide this idea that America is not secure, that it is in the midst of economic upheaval, that it is in the midst of political upheaval. So it is the elites, the bankers, the lawyers, the large-scale landowners, the people with the most to lose economically, who say, we need to come up with something else besides this mobocracy that we're seeing under the Articles of Confederation. We need a stronger executive. We need to protect private property. We need to protect the moneyed classes. And again, there are fears of this lower class revolution. Do we do the George Washington, Thomas Jefferson reactions?
Yeah.
Upper class concerns? Okay, well, these are just some of the questions that the upper class people in America are asking. Is there a need to curb freedom? Do we need to have a curb on freedom and liberty in order to promote strength and security? And guys, that is a debate. That old chestnut has been around since the beginning of this country. What's more important, freedom and liberty or security? I mean, you can have that debate today, just talking about NSA and wiretapping and accumulating. What was the latest report that came out yesterday that the NSA is collecting people's email address books? Yeah. So, I mean, that goes to the whole freedom versus security debate. But this goes all the way back to Shays' Rebellion. What's more important? The question is too much liberty a bad thing? You give people too much freedom. You give them too much liberty. Are they going to take advantage of it? Are they virtuous or are they self-absorbed? Basically, are people human? And so the need for a stronger national government. And that's where you have the Constitutional Convention. It comes out of Shays' Rebellion. It's, the founding fathers that you guys know, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, looking for national authority to galvanize the nation. Hamilton is the guy with the economic vision. He's the guy that believes that if America can get out of its own way, America can be an economic superpower. We've got the people, we've got the educational system, we've got the resources, we've got the variety in the economy, that America could be the economic powerhouse for the 19th century. That is the Hamiltonian vision. And he lays that out. I mean, I'll talk more about it when we talk about George Washington and his administration, but he lays out basically an argument called the Report on Manufactures, which basically lays out this idea of economic empire. If only America can get its political house in order. So that's really what the concern is. Economic and social order. They meet in Annapolis in 1786. Only 6 states show up. So really the biggest thing to come out of the Annapolis Convention in 1786 is that they agreed to meet in Philadelphia in 1787 and amend the Articles. And that's the goal. That is the goal, to amend the Articles of Confederation. But if you remember, according to the Articles of Confederation, what does it require to amend the Articles?
Unanimous vote.
Unanimous vote, all 13 states. You're never going to get all 13 states to agree. So what the Constitutional Convention does in 1787, each of the states elects delegates to this convention. They are not members of the Articles government. They're not members of the Articles Congress. They are outside of the Articles of Confederation. They get together, 55 guys, mainly wealthy, mainly elite, money classes. They get together in Philadelphia. They take the Articles of Confederation government and throw it out. These are people who are not affiliated with the government, sitting in a room, taking the existing government and chucking it. They literally rip up the Articles, but they basically said the Articles are unsalvageable. They cannot be fixed. We need to start from scratch. We need to do something new. So you take the existing government and you replace it with a new government. Guys, in any other country around the world, that is called a coup d'etat. We don't call it a coup d'etat here because, heaven forbid, we should be like, Colombia or, some other third world country. Coup d'etats happen in third world countries, not in America. But that's what happened. You had a small group of elites sitting in a room that chucked out the existing government and wrote a completely new government. So that's something for you to chew on. Because we'll talk about that more when we get to Unit 3. Really, all you are responsible for Unit 2 is Shays' Rebellion and knowing the impact of Shays' Rebellion, why it was so problematic and what it led to. Okay? All right. So are there any questions on the political expectations, fulfilling political expectations for freedom and equality? Do you get the freedom and equality politically that everybody thought they were going to get after the revolution? Ultimately. Do you get that freedom and equality? Rich white people do. That's nice and nuanced. You're right. They definitely get freedom and equality. But for the average Joe who would have expected freedom, liberty, and equality, that egalitarianist spirit, you don't fully get that. It's limited. It's curved. Economically, do you get the freedom and equality that you expect at the end of the American Revolution? When you're thinking economic freedom, you're thinking opportunity to make money. Do people get that economic opportunity? Somewhat, yes, no?
A little bit.
Somewhat. I mean, look at all that land that you've got out there west of the Appalachian Mountains. And the Articles government, God bless, they are able to create an orderly system for buying that land. But who buys up that land? Rich people. With the hope of turning around and making a profit off of it. So the rich get richer. All right. So, with regard to other post-war sentiments, we talked about the virtuous republic, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Venerate the plow, Republican agrarianism, republicanism. Okay, there we go. All right. recognize this? It says, am I not a man and a brother? What is the idea behind this? Yeah. The articles don't say all men are created equal. The Declaration says all men are created equal. And the Declaration is not a governing document. The Declaration is not a constitution or an Articles of Confederation. It is a statement of ideals. So you can put anything you want in it. You can put anything you want in a declaration. It has no governing authority whatsoever. Yeah.
Like the idea of anti-slavery.
Now, where would people get this idea that slavery was bad at the end of the American Revolution? Where would people come up with this crazy idea? Can we go back to you? You were right on the green. You just needed to sink it. Yeah.
So that concept of Army Council when they worked for the Declaration.
Yes. In the Declaration, it says all men are created equal. It is a statement of purpose. And the question after the American Revolution is, do we really believe that crap? I mean, do we really live up to the ideals that we put forth in our vision statement? Do we practice what we preach? And some people argue that slaves should be free, that they are equal, that slavery in a country that claims to cherish liberty is anathema, it is abhorrent, it is hypocritical. And so you start to see a movement, even during the American Revolution. You see a movement among Americans to start to manumit, free their slaves, to emancipate their slaves. There are 3 good words to learn there. Manumit, emancipate, free. They all mean the same thing. But if you want your vocabulary to sound better, use the first 2. Can't go wrong with emancipate. It's a good word. In fact, there are even proclamations with emancipate in it. And it's interesting, during the American Revolution, members of the British government called out the Americans for this hypocrisy. I forget who, it may have been King George III himself. And I'm paraphrasing, but said something along the lines of, why is it that the loudest yells for freedom come from slave owners? I mean, everybody recognized the hypocrisy of what was going on here. This is a country that claims to be the example for the, Thomas Paine says, America, the idea of America is the idea for the rest of the world. Huh? Yeah. Love the Lincoln shirt. Oh, Lincoln rocks. And there are people that are going to start to free their slaves. There are going to be slave owners during the American Revolution that practice what they preach and start to free their slaves because they believe it's morally the right thing to do. There are going to be anti-slavery societies founded. Now, who in America is going to start to found these first anti-slavery societies? Yeah. Why Quakers?
This is the religion that lets women speak out. They're kind of like, hey, equality, dude.
You know what? Quakers actually practice what they preach. The idea of equality. Men, women, whites, blacks. Everybody's equal. Everybody's created by God. Everybody's got an inner light. That's the core philosophy of Quakerism. Yeah.
This is why you need to read Chesky. I know pretty much so much
good. The more outside reading you do, the more you bring to the table, though, which is good. Right, Nadia? Darn right. So yeah, the Quakers. And so where do you think the first anti-slavery societies are going to be founded? In Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. And Quakers are going to partner with free blacks. You're going to see the creation of black churches, black communities, the AME Church, and blacks, free blacks, Quakers, and other people interested in emancipation are going to work together to try to promote emancipation. And it's going to be somewhat successful. After the American Revolution, you are going to see some people free their slaves. You are also going to see most of the states north of the Mason-Dixon line are going to issue emancipation laws. Not because they're noble or anything like that, but because economically slavery it's not viable north of the Mason-Dixon line. So by the end of the American Revolution, most of the states north of Maryland have banned slavery, aside from maybe like New Jersey. I think the last slaves in New Jersey were freed in the 1840s, believe it or not. But slavery survives the war. Despite this action, despite the idea of freedom. During the American Revolution, British soldiers marching through the South promised freedom to any slave that escaped their masters. It was an attempt to undermine the Southern economic model. You have attempts at emancipation, northern religion and feelings of liberty support freedom. So there is a religiosity behind this. There is a religious moral component behind this. That a lot of that northern religious sentiment is promoting this idea of reform, of emancipation. Quakers organizing emancipation of slaves, and slaves escaping to cities like Philadelphia and Boston and establishing black neighborhoods, free black neighborhoods. And at the end of the war, you've got sentiments of equality that lead to calls for emancipation. However, Southerners argued that slavery served a greater good. So let's just use, for example, Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson, one of the founding fathers, he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He's the guy that wrote all men are created equal. He wrote that. And yet owned over 100 slaves at Monticello. And throughout his entire life, did not free them. George Washington, the head of the American Revolution, had Mount Vernon as a plantation, one of the largest slave owners in the country. His entire life did not free his slaves. Why? What is the greater good being served by these guys owning slaves? I'm sorry, I'm in your way. What is the greater good? Why would Jefferson argue that slavery was necessary? Or why would Washington argue that slavery is necessary?
I don't know how to word this, but I guess the degradation of the few benefits the prosperity of the whole.
How?
Well, because these slaves, they're doing everything nobody else wants to do, and they're creating like a freakish amount of, examples, right, indigo, et cetera, tobacco. So,
Sure.
And if they had to pay, like, white people to do this, there'd be like no money in the government, probably.
All right. Okay. So, okay. I see your point. Yes. Go ahead, Eric.
Back then, they didn't see blacks as equal. They saw them as property.
Yep. we're skirting around the question here. The question is, why didn't Thomas Jefferson, if he believed that all men are created equal, why didn't over the course of his lifetime did he free his slaves? What greater good was it serving for him to have slaves? Yeah. Huh? Well, he made money which was good for him. But think bigger picture. Having slaves at Monticello allowed Thomas Jefferson to do what?
Run the government.
Everything else. He had time. He had time on his hands to do, think of all the things that Jefferson did in his life. All the things that Jefferson is associated with. He's an architect. He's a scholar. The man spoke multiple languages. He was an inventor. Has anybody ever been to Monticello? Anybody? Get to Monticello. Go down there. Take a look at some of the things this guy invented. The guy played the violin. He was into taxidermy. He was into leaf collecting and botany. Him and James Madison used to go on leaf collecting tours. Can you imagine that? Thomas Jefferson and little Jimmy Madison wandering around the forest looking for leaves. Ooh, this is a nice one. Put that in the book. He had time. I mean, the man brought French fries and ice cream to this country. He had time to be a diplomat. He had time to be a thinker. He had time to be a reader. He had time to create the University of Virginia because his slaves were doing all the work. And so the argument among a lot of Southerners is slavery benefits the greater good because it allows white people to have the freedom to do whatever. And I mean, that's going to be an argument that's used up till the Civil War. But you're going to have a new generation of politicians that comes along. Like people, I don't know if you've ever heard of the name John C. Calhoun. He was a senator from South Carolina. That was his main argument. Slavery served the greater good. He's actually the guy that coined the term greater good. Because it allowed white people to have freedom. Slavery preserves white men's liberty. That was the philosophy of slave owners south of the Mason-Dixon line. That's why slavery not only continues after the American Revolution, but expands. It thrives after the American Revolution. Even though there is a push in northern states to free slaves, there is a push among Quakers and other religious reformers to emancipate slaves. Slavery is going to thrive because it preserves a white man's liberty, and right after the American Revolution, you have the invention of the cotton gin, which makes cotton a viable product to mass produce. Anybody ever hear of Phyllis Wheatley? She's not on my test, but she's really cool. I couldn't find a Phyllis Wheatley question, but I like talking about it. Here is a woman who came from Africa, taught herself to read and write, and became one of America's first poets. "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God, there's a Savior too." So she's talking about African slaves encountering Christianity. "Once our redemption neither sought nor knew. Some view our sable race with scornful eye, their color is a diabolic dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes black as Cain may be refined and join the angelic train." What is her main point here? Yeah. We can be Christian and equal just like you. We have the potential. Don't be hypocritical, Christians. Everybody's equal. Yeah.
Which one of her names is spelled correctly? Bottom of the phone.
Oh, right. I actually probably spelled it correctly up there. I mean, this might be the way she spelled it, but when I see Phyllis, I spell it the way it's correctly spelled. Yeah.
It's really interesting. On their shipment to the Caribbean or America, they would be kept in pens in various stations. And basically they'd be given little to no water. They would be sitting in their own filth,
Yes.
little to no food. But
That's right.
all the Christians, hey, Bible, hey, we're going to read this to you. So you
Right.
get the gist before you get back on that boat over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. All right. So, did African Americans achieve their expectations for freedom and equality?
Generally, no.
What?
Generally, no.
Generally, I love the word generally. Because generally allows for the people who did have their expectations met. Because if you say absolutely and never and always, you leave yourself no wiggle room at all. And history writing is all about wiggle room, allowing yourself some flexibility. So the word, that's right. So the word generally allows for wiggle room. So get used to using the word generally and usually, sometimes, because it allows for the exceptions. And yes, generally slaves did not have their expectations for freedom and equality met. But you did have the beginnings of an abolitionist movement in America that had religious underpinnings. And you're going to see, as you get into the 19th century, those religious groups push more for emancipation. How about socially? I mean, we talked about religion, we talked about society with slaves. How about socially, women? Did women get the freedom that they expected or the equality that they expected? Generally, no. Generally, no. Now, look at that. What can you glean just by looking at that? It has no words on it, but what do you get from it? What does it inspire you to think about? Go ahead. She is holding a rifle. She is holding a flintlock with a powder horn. Yeah.
Looks like a woman in a, hat.
The trifold hat,
Yeah,
yes.
and she's holding a rifle, so I assume that she's doing something military-wise.
Are women normally in the military? No. But this is from the American Revolutionary period. It is a woman in a trifold hat, which tells you that she is American or British. Merc. Because the British didn't wear the trifold hats, the Americans did. That was the style of the time. Like the time I wore an onion on my belt. We couldn't get white onions because of the war. We had to wear yellow onions. Really? No Simpsons fans out there? Really? Am I just dating myself now? Am I just at the point where I'm just old? Because I think that's where I'm at right now. All right. Anyway, so what do you, and I use the word glean, but glean means that you get ideas from it. And you look at it and it makes you think about ideas. That's what the word glean means. What do you glean from that?
Women helped fight the revolution, but they didn't get any freedoms out of it.
Okay, so women helped fight the revolution. They're doing the things that men normally do. They've demonstrated during the war that they can do the things that men normally do. However, at the end of the American Revolution, when women are expecting freedom and liberty and equality, they generally don't get it. By the way, this was a document on the 2005 DBQ. No words, just that. So you had to be able to get something from that. You know, one of the biggest critics of gender treatment at the end of the American Revolution is none other than John Adams's wife, Abigail. She was quite outspoken. Dare I say she was the Hillary Clinton of her day. There was I know you guys weren't around for this. I was in my early 20s when Bill Clinton ran for president in 1992. Man, am I dating myself. But I remember back in 1992, Hillary Clinton had her own career. She was a lawyer. She was outspoken. She had her own views. She had her own opinions. She promoted those ideas and opinions, and people railed against that. Oh my God! She should just keep her mouth shut and go bake cookies. Let her husband. I remember watching interviews with like older people, of course, and they're like, "Oh yeah, she should keep her mouth shut and let her husband run the show." Traditional gender roles. That the woman was to be seen and not heard. I mean, you could go all the way back to Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt was quite outspoken for her time. And there was a great deal of criticism levied at Eleanor Roosevelt. Yeah, what were you going to say? Yeah, let Bill Clinton run the show. You see, oh, well, that worked out for you. Every time I talk about Bill Clinton, I feel like I got to take a shower. Anyway, oh, but he was a good guy. Everybody liked Bill. Abigail Adams writing to her husband as they are sitting around debating what the form of government is going to look like. She writes to John Adams, "Don't forget about the ladies, John. Men would be tyrants if they could. When you guys," and basically what she says is, when you guys are sitting around debating what the laws are going to be, make sure you make laws that protect women." So here she is, speaking her mind, giving her 2 cents to her husband. And really, if you look at the John Adams, Abigail Adams relationship, she's really kind of a boss. She was quite opinionated. Now, she never came out in public. You never had an Abigail Adams, Lyceum forum where she would talk about her views and stuff. But quietly behind the scenes, she was the person giving John Adams advice. I would say John Adams' most important political advisor was his wife. You had other women out there like Judith Sargent Murray saying that women's minds were just as good as men's, and therefore women should be treated equally. But that's not where American sentiment went. American sentiment after the American Revolution can best be summed up by this: Republican motherhood. Republican motherhood. Women were important. Women had a role to play. Women had a sphere that they dominated, and it was the domestic sphere. A woman's job after the American Revolution was to raise virtuous children for the Republic. Well-educated children capable of making wise decisions. In particularly, I'm just making words up now. In particular, male children, men. That the first duty was to raise good and virtuous sons to lead the Republic. And so therefore, in order to do that, what was it necessary for a woman to do? If a woman was going to be primarily responsible for raising good, well-educated, virtuous children, what was it going to be incumbent upon the woman to do? So therefore, she was going to need an education. So you're going to see increased educational opportunities for women after the American Revolution. Matter of fact, you're going to see the founding of all women's schools. But they're not going to be teaching women Latin or Euclidean geometry or, Homer's Odyssey or any of the classics that anybody else would get in college. They're not learning law. They're not learning medicine, as arcane as medicine was in the late 1700s. Oh, just throw some leeches on him. He'll be fine. Put a poultice on him. That'll be all right. It'll extract the bad humors. But it was increased educational opportunities to teach women how to be good mothers, how to raise a household, how to run a house, a budget, how to teach children to read and write. It wasn't education for the woman's sake, it was education for the family's sake, because that was her primary responsibility. Guys, I'll tell you right now, there is always an Abigail Adams question on the test. I always see, remember the ladies, because it checks the box. Remember I said, the test checks the box. And Abigail Adams checks the box. A woman reformer, a woman speaking her mind at a time when women were not expected to speak their minds. Yeah, that's pretty much it. You got it. That's right. Now you're getting it. So up until this point, the two women you would really need to know are Anne Hutchinson and Abigail Adams, up to this point. Because they're always test questions. Because they were outside the usual. They represented breaking with the norm and progressing women. Now, you had women out there who were quite vociferous about a woman's place in society. Now, Mary Wollstonecraft, even though she was British, by the way, but her work, The Vindication of the Rights of Women, was very popular here in America, was widely read. She represents the outlier. She is not the norm. She ridiculed prevailing notions about women as being helpless. She said that women were no more than slaves and legal prostitutes to their husbands. And that's how much power a man had over her husband. A man had over her wife.
His wife.
I don't. Yeah, by pronouns. So women were no more than slaves and legal prostitutes. And people like Mary Wollstonecraft encouraged women to go get an education for themselves. Not for their family, but for their own edification, to build up their own capacity. I love the word edification, by the way. An edifice is a building. Edification means you're building capacity, a foundation, strong foundation for yourself. So you are seeing the first women's schools created. Mary Wollstonecraft, I'll just bring this up. It's never on an AP test. It's just interesting stuff, and I actually do have some. What is this period of 9:15? Yeah, I'll get tons of free time. Mary Wollstonecraft's daughter was named Mary. I guess Mary Jr. Yeah. How'd you know that? Where'd you get that from?
I remember hearing about it.
Yes, that's right. Mary Wollstonecraft's daughter Mary married Percy Bysshe Shelley. She became Mary Shelley and wrote Frankenstein, which is a classic of romantic literature in the early 1800s. Written by a girl. Why is that messed up? She wrote a classic horror story. Huh? Yeah, I know.
Didn't she write it with a bunch of friends?
Yes.
They were competing against each other?
Yes. They were all traveling in the same literary circles there. They were all friends. And yeah, so this was the early 19th century is what's known as the Romantic period. And by romantic, we're not talking about, ooh, I'm in love. We're talking overblown emotionalism. I mean, even in America, we'll take a look at some of the paintings from the early 1800s. We'll do a whole thing on art, but it's romantic art and romanticism, not just in art, but also in literature as well. You take a look at early American literature from the early 1800s. It's very romantic and overly emotional. All right. Now, the last group, Native Americans. This is an easy one. Did Native Americans achieve their expectations for freedom and equality? No, generally not. Usually not. And that is because the Native Americans who had sided with the British during the American Revolution are now going to find themselves under attack, especially as Americans start to move west of the Appalachian Mountains. This is the Pennsylvania border right here. Okay? Here's Pittsburgh. This is Ohio. There's Lake Erie, Toledo Range, there's the Ohio River right there. There you are. Okay, there's Ohio. So there's the grid. Okay, here's the grid that they're creating out here with the land ordinances, and they're subdividing all of this land. But there are people who live on that land already. And so the land is being subdivided, much to the chagrin of the natives. And so the natives west of the Appalachian Mountains are going to pull a Pontiac. Much like Pontiac did at the end of the French and Indian War, galvanizing the Western Indian tribes together to fight back against British expansion west of the Appalachians. The Indians here in Ohio are going to band together. And when you have a loose-knit group of people banded together, it's called a confederacy. And this confederacy, sometimes it's referred to as the Miami Confederacy, after the Miami Indians of Ohio, or sometimes it's referred to as the Shawnee Confederacy. But they are run and organized by a Indian chief called Little Turtle. And they fight back against the Americans that are streaming over the Appalachians into Ohio. And they lose. They are defeated by an American general named Mad Anthony Wayne. Mad was not his given Christian name, but they called him Mad Anthony because he was into torturing Indians. What's that? Are they Miami? Really? That's so cool. And they got moved to Oklahoma during the 1830s and 40s. That's right. Yeah. All the Indian tribes east of the Mississippi River got forcibly moved in the 1830s and 40s under Andrew Jackson's Indian removal policy. Also, always a test question. Trail of Tears. Yep, there's always something about Indian removal. So when Little Turtle and his Miami Confederacy are defeated, the government, by the way, you'll notice this is 1794, 1795. The Constitution has already been enacted. You have President George Washington in charge. His government is going to sign the Treaty of Greenville. And this is the first American treaty you would be responsible for knowing. Now, I don't know if it's on my test or not. I don't have my review sheet in front of me. I've seen Treaty of Greenville before. And what the Washington administration does is it establishes this precedent of treating Indian tribes as if they were separate nations. The Miami are a nation. The Shawnee are a nation. The Fox, the Sauk, they are nations. So they're referred to as the Indian nations. And you sign a treaty with these Indian nations like you would sign a treaty with France or like you would sign a treaty with Great Britain. And that's the precedent that is established with Washington. And pretty much every president follows that. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, John Quincy Adams, up until Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson breaks the precedent. He says, we don't have to sign a treaty with these people. Just move them. Okay. Are there any questions? That pretty much wraps it up in a circuitous route, but yeah, Eric.
So the importance of the Treaty of Greenville was that
Establish the precedent for signing treaties with Native Americans that will be broken by the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Anything else? Okay. That's it for Chapter 2. All right, Chapter 2, Unit 2. Because we already did this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. All right. Now, I gave this to 2A yesterday because I wasn't here. I was taking my kids to the dentist, and I wanted to make sure they at least had. Oh, and it was great. Am I off? You can now turn me off. Goodbye. I have 2 kids.